you? Oh, and then other than, there's Dudu. How?
It's this technology. When you are born before technology, these things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so good morning, colleagues. I am Dudu Poso Chibwana, and I am John's colleague. He's my twin brother. Welcome to this training. We are here for you.
Thanks, Dudu. The last person that I want to bring to attention is a colleague also from the Marketing and Communications Unit, other than Ms. Diale, who is the manager in that unit. We're also joined by Mr. Muchoko, Mandla Muchoko, who is also with us in the session. Mandla, if you are with us, just perhaps to say hello, hi. Mandla?
Okay, it seems Mandla is engaged in
Okay.
something. Yes, but he is the communications officer. Yeah.
Okay, we are then in your hands. I see that there's already a comment or question that has been raised on the chat about the recording. Maybe you can also touch on that in your intro. Thank you.
Okay, the session is recorded, and we are going to be uploading it on YouTube. But also, I would also suggest that the link that we will forward where you register your details, please enter your details there so that we can also send it to you via email. And then in terms of
location, have a look at that. We'll draft something. We'll get that through to you.
Okay, I would request that if your mic is unmuted, please mute it because it's making a background noise. So that will be one of the requests. And then if you want to say something or you want to ask a question, there is a raise hand feature. But I know like sometimes people can't find that feature. So if you're struggling to find that raise hand feature, you can unmute yourself and then we will allow you to speak. So I will manage that for those that are struggling to find the hand feature. So that's about it, except just to highlight again to mute if you are not speaking. I see there's a hand up pertaining okay, yeah, there's a hand up. I don't know, perhaps if it's related to what I'm saying, then you can ask a question.
It's from me, it's from Zain here. I just want to clarify, there was a bit of a break of signal. Are you going to be putting the recorded session today up on YouTube and also emailing us the link for this session?
Yes, but what's important is the link that we're going to forward you. I'll try paste the link onto the chat so that maybe as you are doing the training, you can also complete the form, just so that we have all your details and information, because some people might not registered prior, so that we can be able to send you the link and the presentation and the manual, right, John?
Yes, so there will be a manual that will send, including the presentation, which will be sent to you by end of the session. Those are just some of the handouts. We thought, let's not send this up front and trying to get us all focused on the presentation this morning. So and when we finish, we'll send the manual out to you guys.
Yeah, and do use the chat session if there's any comments or questions on the chat. We'll also take questions from the chat and try to answer as we go.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Lesego, for that. I think we are all clear. Without much ado, let me then hand you over, colleagues, to our lead facilitator, as I said, Cheryl, and maybe in her opening, she'll just also give us a fuller background and intro of herself. Cheryl, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Do you hear me? Do they hear me? Okay, I'm Cheryl Holmes, and I've been working in the social housing sector for about 14 years. And as John said, as an executive manager in one of the biggest social housing institutions in the country. So my knowledge is very hands-on, and I'm very pretty much aware of what the challenges are in terms of social housing. And I'm hoping, because this is the first time that we're doing this Zoom session, I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to impart enough knowledge to you guys as possible. And because I can't see everybody's faces, I would like the session to be as interactive as possible so that I get a sense of where people are at, and if there are any questions that you need to ask, then please just inform me. What I would like to say is that for today, just to give you a brief on the program for today so that you're aware, as you can see on the screen, there's quite a number of areas that we're going to cover. I'm hoping that by the end of today, we can get into the accreditation for SHI requirements, and then tomorrow we'll do the rest of the sessions. The first 3 sessions, I'll go into the background, the policy.
Hello.
And
I'm fine.
hi. Is that somebody coming in? And go into sector roles and responsibilities. And after that, John is going to show a 10-minute video just so that you can get a better understanding of what social housing is. And then we'll carry on with the session. So without any further ado, let me just go into it. You see. Now, just in terms of background of social housing, in about 1995, before I do that, what I'm presenting to you is really a summary of your manual. So I'm going to give you a summary, but please go through your manual because your manual goes into much more detail, whereas where possible, I will talk through some of the issues. So just a brief background was that in 1995, the institutional subsidy program was recognized, and this is where the program began to talk about rental option and about that type of form of tenure. In 2005, we then had the social housing policy, which was drafted. In 2008, the Social Housing Act was promulgated, and then in 2010, the SHRA was established. So people will say, oh, the SHRA was only established in 2010, but there were institutions that were delivering social housing. But in the interim, there was another institution that was overseeing the funds and distributing the funds. But it's from 2010, when SHRA was established, that the sector really became regulated. Okay, the social housing policy, you'll find it in key documents, and I will encourage everybody to read these particular documents, especially the legislation and the acts. So if you could go through the social housing policy of 2005, and you will see in the housing code, the revised version of 2009, the Social Housing Act 16 of 2008, as well as the social housing regulations. It is in these documents that you're going to get detailed information about the legislation and what legislation says. What I'm going to give you today is really a summary that's going to be relevant for you. So if we look at the Social Housing Act and what its intention was, The primary intention of the Social Housing Act was to deliver affordable housing to moderate income groups. Now you'll know the Act will say to lower income groups. We've actually changed this to moderate income groups,
Yeah, it's a training
because the target market has changed slightly.
Oh, good, thank you. Yeah, in real life. Yeah, I am.
Okay, are people there? Can I carry on? And one of the things that the Act says is very, very clear on where social housing must be, as well as in what type, where projects must be situated. Now, the primary objective of this Act is that government wants to achieve spatial, economic, social integration and restructure some of our urban environments. I'm sure all of you know that in the past, our cities, our towns, and where people were situated was always very far away from the economic hub. You'll find, and it was racially based. So you will find that our Black, or let me call them your specific non-white communities, resided in areas that were very, very far from the city and where the economic opportunities were for people. Now, why does government feel that it's important that we begin to integrate communities? As that social housing is just one of those very, very objective of integration. You find your RDP houses will always be in a township. You find other housing products will pretty much be in that area. But social housing is very different because it is near to where the economic hubs is, so that people of different race groups, different orientations can live closer to the city. So if I want to give you an example, I can be a helper that's working for a very affluent white family, but my income and the salary that I get goes to transport. So you'll find that somebody has to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get to their place of work. But with social housing projects, because the projects are based in economic hubs, in restructuring zones, that domestic helper can then go into a social housing project and actually walk to work and use her income to then pay, contribute towards her family. The third point on my slide really talks about non-racial integrated society living in sustainable human settlements. And that's precisely what I'm talking about. It's the integration of our different race groups, different age groups, different sexual orientation. And because our policies and everything that we do in our laws are non-discriminatory, so you'll have gay couples going into social housing, you'll get young couples going into social housing, you get young people being able to live in social housing. Now, we're saying, what is this social housing? And I don't like to use the word cooperative, although the Act says that, but really it is a rental housing option that is provided by social housing institutions, other delivery agents. What's important is that all these projects are delivered in designated restructuring zones. And I want to emphasize this rental option thing, because our communities and people out there get very confused. When they hear social housing, they think, okay, it's a government project, it's free housing, I rent, and then I want to own the product. So it's very, very important for everybody who's here is to understand that this is purely governments contributing to rental options. So what does this really mean is that people enter into these rental projects, but because when your circumstances change or your family earns a higher income, people can begin to move out of rental project. It will always be a rental project. You're going to hear terms like people saying, oh, I can't rent forever. This needs to be a rent to buy or a rent to own. So it is very, very clear that when we communicate and when you understand this product is that will always be a rental project option. It will never be for ownership. It will never be that I'm going to rent to buy and all these terminologies that people use. What's also important is that these products are provided by housing institutions or other delivery agents. So you have the private sector also coming in as delivery agents in approved projects. So those projects, all social housing projects, need to be approved before they are put or started. And in designated restructuring zones, I'll talk about a bit about restructuring zones. The other important thing is that social housing requires institutionalized management. What does that mean? It means that you have a product out there. That product needs to be managed so that you are able to collect rent. You are supposed to maintain. You are supposed to ensure that there's relationships between you and your tenants. So it's not just about the structure. There's a whole range of issues that you need and programs that go into social housing. And those that will start attending tenant management, you're going to see that there's programs. So we don't just look at the bricks and mortar. We also look at the people that are living in those projects and the relationships we build and the programs that we run. Because remember, we are trying to achieve, say, this objective of people living in well-managed buildings. Those buildings are safe, that there is safety networks, things like your community development, that people, your tenants, are participating in programs, so that you'll get a lot of that information in the tenant management. So what is a social housing institution? An institution is one that has been accredited or provisionally accredited under the Social Housing Act. As we go into the presentation, you will see, we will talk about the whole accreditation process. What is required for accreditation? So you cannot just be an institution and say, okay, now I'm going to set up this company and I'm going to start building social housing. That's not going to happen because the law requires that certain things are put in place. This institution has been accredited. Remember, we are using public money. So we need to ensure that the public money is used for what its purpose was, first of all, and that there are standards that are maintained. And it's really the SHRA that is responsible for ensuring that institutions comply in terms of the Act. Does anybody have questions? Are you all guys still okay?
Hi, Cheryl. You mentioned about, sorry, it's Cian Bow speaking. You mentioned about the rental option. It will not be for ownership. So I'm aware of such places that come up. So is that how the social housing work? It will never be yours to own?
No. And this is where the biggest challenge comes in the sector, is that our communities and people don't understand what the Act is saying and what the law is saying. that it's a rental option. So people confuse things that are in the housing code, because in the housing code, you'll hear things like installment sales and rent to own and all those type of products. So people then confuse social housing with that. That's why it's important that you go through the act very carefully and let people understand, and you understand, that this will always be a rental option. In terms of the act further down, we'll talk about, and I'll give you some things that are in the act if people want to get out as an institution, what you need to do. I no longer want to manage or run the stock, but there's a process that you need to follow. You must remember that government has various options. So we'll get your social housing, which is rental. We get our breaking new ground, which we call our RDP. Now, there's another government program that people forget about or don't know about, is that you have social housing, which is rental, and then they have another program, which is SPLIS, which is a government program where you get subsidized to actually buy and own property. So that's a different program. So it's important that you also understand the different programs, so you are able to say to people, you want to own, social housing is not for you. Go and see where there are FLIS programs. That means that it is bonded, and I think the price is partially subsidized by the state, and you then can own property. So that's where the confusion comes in. I hope I've clarified that to you.
You perfectly did. I think your ending statement says there, if you want to own, then social housing is not for you. I think that for me is the catchphrase. Thanks a lot, Cheryl.
All right, so let's just go to the next section. Now, remember I said in the beginning, you have social housing projects are approved projects. So what does that mean? It means that that particular project has to comply with certain things that are set out by the SHRA. And I think people, you'll get it in the next session tomorrow. What does an accredited project entail? What are the criteria for an accredited project? So social housing is developed, and that project needs to be accredited. And it's accredited because the state contributes to the development, or let's say the SHRA through their restructuring grant provides funding so that you are able to develop those projects. So that funding will either go to the social housing institution or the other development agencies, so that they are able to build these projects. What's also very, very critical and important is that you cannot just go and build social housing anywhere. Or you see a piece of land and you say, oh, here's a vacant piece of land, I'm going to put up social housing. The legislation is very clear that these projects have to be put up in the restructuring zones. So what are these restructuring zones? They're actually geographical areas that normally will be identified by a municipality in agreement with your province for the purposes of social housing. What is also different is that these restructuring zones are go to the national minister, and they are gazetted as restructuring zones for approved projects. So it's important when people are putting up social housing is that you need to ensure, if you see a piece of land, you need to check with your municipality, with your province, whether that piece of land or that building or wherever you identify opportunities is actually in a restructuring zone. If it's not in a restructuring zone, it means that you will not be able to get funding to develop the social housing project. Now, restructuring zone compromises three main dimensions. So what does this mean? It means that there are certain things your municipality and your province are going to look at, and there are certain things that your national government or national minister are going to look at. So the restructuring zone must meet these criteria. It means that there must be spatial restructuring. And this is important, and I spoke about this earlier, is that the houses are located in defined localities where there's areas of economic opportunity. It would not make sense to develop social housing in far away in some bundu, and people must travel miles and miles to get to their places of work. So remember, I said to you, what we are doing is we are bringing social housing closer to economic areas. So it's closer to your inner cities, closer to your suburbs where there's economic development, like there's buildings, there's offices, there's hospitals, there's schools, there's all those things in those particular areas, and people can work in those areas. And I also spoke about social restructuring. So what does this mean? I spoke about you are then able to integrate communities. Our previous communities, like I said in the beginning, were very specific. Blacks had their township, colors had their townships, Indians had their township, and whites had their suburbs. And their suburbs and their places were always built where there was economic opportunity. So this program changes the face of what our cities are going to look like. It is saying now we are bringing people from these areas to move in closer, and we can then have a mix of beneficiaries. There's a mix of incomes as well. So the social restructuring is very important. Also, I spoke about economic restructuring, so that social housing is a contributor for affordable rental housing in good locations. Normally, what we would find, like in Johannesburg, a place like Sandton had your most expensive townhouses. Now, because in Johannesburg, some of those areas close to Sandton have been identified as restructuring zones, we are now seeing social housing being developed in these areas. But what's important is that when you see the video, you will see what social housing looks like. You will not tell the difference between a social housing project and a townhouse complex, because we have progressed to such an extent that people can live now in these beautiful apartments or these beautiful rental units at a very, very affordable rate. So you'll always find this thing, oh, there'll be boycotts, or people will start doing petitions and saying, no, 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 you're not going to bring social housing here to bring down the values of our properties. So I know that in Johannesburg, lots of cases have been won because institutions are able to produce their management model, what this product is going to look like. And people have then begun to understand and change their minds about social housing. So we used to, our old municipal products, I'm sure most of you have seen them, where those rental units have deteriorated to such an extent that they've become dumps. So, because, and the problem with that was that those things were built, but there was no management model in place. Those products were not managed. And if you look at the quality of some of those units, you'll be amazed. There's 3-bedroom, beautiful, strong, well-built apartment, but because of lack of maintenance, we now see them as dumps. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that on TV in the Western Cape and in your areas in Gauteng. There are hundreds of these type of units that are falling apart. So this is a completely different way of managing rental units. In fact, it is in line with what the private sector does. If not, we are even more regulated in terms of what you need to have in place and the role that SHRA plays in ensuring that those products are well managed. And you'll see that in your tenant management training, in your property management training, when you attend those, you will see all the requirements and the things that you need to put in place so that you ensure you maintain the value of that asset. Okay, people with me, no questions? Any questions?
Well, just to say that we will avail a list of restructuring zones to everyone as part of the pack. So you'll receive the manual, you'll receive the presentation, but also a list of the restructuring zones, which gives you a view of where these things are countrywide.
Okay, thanks, John. So if you look at my slide, and I'm just recapping to give you an idea of what the social housing is. So it's a rental option for low to medium income households. But now, because the incomes have moved, we now call it moderate incomes. These products must have institutional management. They're provided by social housing institutions or other delivery agents in approved projects in designated restructuring zones with the benefit of public funding. So that's really a summary of what social housing is. It's rental, it's in a restructuring zone, it's for moderate income, and it's rental in a bolded and in capital letters and underlined. Restructuring zones, it must have institutional management. It's provided by accredited social housing institutions or delivery agents. The projects must be approved in designated restructuring zones with public funding. Okay, so we're saying, if you look at my presentation at the bottom, I've just given you what the target market is currently, is that it's a mixed income. Remember, we're saying some of the criteria is that for integration, we have a mixture of race and we have a mixture of income groups. So there's a primary target market for households earning between 1,500 to 5,500 Rand. Then there's a secondary market, which is household income from 5,501 Rand to 15,000. I'll talk a bit more about these primary markets later on in my presentation. But as you can see, there's a whole range of income groups. So it means that domestic worker is able to go in to pay the rent of a primary market, and I will show you how rentals can be broken down so that it's affordable for that particular income group. So your domestic worker, your nurse, your teacher, whoever earns an income up to 15,000 can go into a social housing project. In the past, and in the Act, you will see it says up to 7.5. But about a year or two ago, the industry lobbied and institutions came together to say, you can't keep it at 7.5 for the past 10 years. People's incomes progress, and therefore the minister then changed, and this has been approved by Parliament, that these are now the new income groups for social housing. We also saying that the delivery agents for social housing are your accredited social housing institutions, your private sector. There's also municipal entities and your private partnerships. Now, in a municipal entity, you find some municipalities cannot themselves, government cannot themselves deliver social housing. What municipalities do is that they set up their own social housing institutions as a company, as a separate entity, like you'll see in Joburg and some other municipalities. You get your city power, which is a company set up by the municipality to run electricity. It has its own governing structures, although the municipality is the main shareholder. The same with your Joburg water, the roads and so forth. You will see the municipalities set up these entities, especially your big metros, to run these programs or certain core deliveries. And now the municipality can also set up a social housing institution that will deliver the social housing projects for its specific area. Whichever city that municipality runs or that metro runs, that agency or that institution delivers its social housing programs. The plus about that is that they get support from the municipality. Their budgets, their funding becomes part of the municipality's capital funding program. So they can get, they don't have things like debt funding. We'll talk about a bit about it more as we carry on. The balance or the shortfall of what the SHRA gives is given by the municipality. But there's also negatives to it, which we can talk about later. So there's different types of institutions. The most important for us to know is that they have to be accredited private sector or accredited social housing institution. Even a municipal owned housing institution still has to go through the process of accreditation with the SHRA. Okay, then we are saying they delivered in designated restructuring zones. These are areas identified by the municipality, supported by the province and approved by national government. What's also important is that we call it institutionalized management. It means that those assets are managed. There are people, there are structures in place, there's different units within an institution that looks at different aspects. And also, the other important thing is that it's medium to high density. So you can't have single standing units and call that social housing. It has to be medium to high density products. Everybody with me? Are you still fine so far? I've just summarized what we spoke about and what is important in terms of the Act. Any questions?
No questions here.
Yeah. Everybody's fine and on board. Okay. So let's move to other things, which I'm not going to go into in great detail because this is in your manual. I'm going to just perhaps show you in terms of legislation that there are general principles that social housing must adhere to. And you find these principles throughout government's documents. So social housing is not something that is just out there doing its own thing. There are certain principles that it must be adhered to, and you find these again. You find them in the Housing Act, and it's in Part 1, Section 2. Read that up. The other very, very important part of legislation is the Rental Act of 50 of 1999, because although social housing a social housing program is a government program, there is legislation, other pieces of legislation that we need to comply with that the same legislation that private sector needs to comply with. So if I'm an estate agent doing rental, they have to comply to the Rental Act. So social housing institutions have to comply to the Rental Act. So that's an act that you must also familiarize yourselves with, so you can see what is in this Rental Act, what can or can't we do as landlords and as tenants and so forth. You'll also look at the white paper. The urban development framework really looks at where social housing is, must be built and so forth. The housing code and the comprehensive plan for development of sustainable human settlements. So those are all important documents. Go through those, read them. So I'll just give you a few principles. I don't want to take too much of your time here. We've just got 4 minutes before John shows the presentation. Is that across government's housing projects, or not even housing, generally government's programs have a set of principles. And housing programs in human settlements have a set of principles that we must adhere to. So one of them is responsive to local housing demands. That's a very important one. You cannot go and build social housing if you are not addressing a demand for that product, which is very, very important. That is why when you are developing a project, there are certain things the SHRA is going to require from you. For example, that you do a demand, there's a market survey, and you must show that there's a demand for that project. Another one, and this is across generally government's projects, is that we need to prioritize women, children, persons with disabilities. You'll find certain institutions in their policy documents, they will say, or the board will say, 5% of the units must be for people with disabilities. So that unit will be built so that it's able to accommodate a wheelchair, or it's for somebody that is blind or somebody that is deaf, whichever disability. Those units are configured so that they can accommodate those types of disabilities. So that's an important thing to look at when you develop your policies and how you are going to address some of these important requirements. I'm not going to go through all of them. I think discrimination we spoke about, that there's secure tenure for residents. So you can't be what do they call those landlords that put people in rent to them at, they just make up rental amounts. There's no lease agreement and you put somebody in and then tomorrow you kick them out. You know, our backdoor rental, that people have no security of tenure. So security means there's an agreement between the tenant and the institution, okay? Transparency, accountable is also important. So it means people must know. You are supposed to go and tell the community wherever you are building these products, these are the qualifying criteria, these are the income groups, this is the rent, this is how we will manage our applications. So that process is transparent, so people can't say, oh, that one came yesterday, it's his friend, they jumped the list. All those things are very, very important. Another one is your best practice, minimum norm standards in relation to the delivery of social housing. So this best practice and norms and standards is critical, because remember we're saying these things must look the same like when you put them up there. Your tenants must be paying rent and so forth. So these are the some type of things that best practice is something where we learn as we go along. an institution can have best practice in the way they collect rent. And it is here that institutions come together and the SHRA consolidates all this information so that they can train everybody and say, these are best practices, this is how people collected rent, and this is how they do things, okay? Another important one, obviously, if you are using public money, we have to ensure that we use that money properly and that money goes to where it's supposed to. And obviously there's certain legislation like your constitution, which talks about discrimination and so forth. So those are just principles that I'm not going to talk a lot about, but read them. They are in your manual. When your manual comes, you'll find I've listed a whole lot of those principles. Are there any questions before I give it to John so that he can just show you a video so that you get an understanding about what does this animal look like, what some of the products, what do they look like. Our slides also got an example of social housing projects, what they look like, and the video will give you some idea. So does anybody have any questions so far so that John can show his video? We're ready to move on. John?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we can move on.
Hey?
Okay. Thanks,
Okay.
Cheryl, for that. I see that we still have a challenge with a bit of echo. Can I still request that please keep yourself on mute so that we don't compromise the quality of this call and all of us can benefit from this. So please, if you are unmuted, please mute yourself. At this point, we will be showcasing a 10-minute video which profiles a number of social housing institutions. And it takes us through the interviews that were done with some of the tenants and what their experiences are, but also goes further and interviews the social housing institutions who are themselves the managers, the developers and the managers of these products. So Mantla and Lesego will be assisting us with that, the playing of that video. Mantla, Lesego. Mantla, Lesego, please just give us an indication that you are loading the video.
Yes, we are loading.
Cool.
Okay.
Are you having difficulty with the video, Lesego?
Yeah, Are you able to see?
We can see the folder and we hear the sound.
Maybe drag the video across to the same screen as the folder, Lasejo.
Okay.
So play it and then pause it and minimize it and then drag it across.
Okay.
And then John, there's one user there. It's got some funny number. It's 1LD something. That's the user that's giving feedback.
Yeah, you're right. Unfortunately I don't know how to mute them. It was showing just now.
Oh, you want to mute?
Yeah, there's someone.
Yeah, I think Lasejo can do the muting.
I thought I saw the video just in a very split second and it disappeared. So whatever it is that you did then definitely works.
Lasejo?
Yes.
So play the video but then pause it.
Yes. It's paused.
Now double click on the screen where it's paused.
Oh, let's see.
And then see if you can drag it across to the same screen as the folder, because we can see that screen currently.
Okay. I think I just had to double click
There we go.
on it. Yeah.
They're really helping our people. They're really helping us because their flats are affordable, and then my kids, they can also play, and then on weekends they can play outside. As you can see, there is a green grass. They can play, and then I love this place. And then I'm saying the founder of the East Housing, forward, create more houses, create more flats for our people to have place to stay. Thank you.
Yes, City Housing is committed to transformation and empowerment. Currently on this Thembelihle project, we have 22 Black-owned companies that are contractors and subcontractors, and 8 Black women who are subcontractors on site. And we're looking at moving towards a greater transformational process on our various projects that we are initiating. The current project that we have at Thembelihle should be replicated in other areas. The strategic plan behind this project is important to show the rest of the city areas what we can actually do.
We say empower ordinary South Africans who currently don't have, they are not necessarily highly educated, they don't necessarily have high paying jobs, but they want to own assets that are meaningful for their families, and they want to own these inner city assets. We think it can be done. We know it can be done. It has been done in the past. We've done it in the past. So we say we need access to that sort of fund to assist those entrepreneurs. TAF is a company that's been around for years. Like I said, we have a 14-year track record, and we have funded over 44,000 units since our existence.
I actually saw this area the time it was blooming and the time it fell down, and I think this place will actually bring up, you know, the property values of this part of town of CBD. And all I can say is thanks, because a few years back my brother got marked actually on this corner because of the environment before this place was here. So So now the place is here, it's safer, and like I said, it's going to pick up the value of Pretoria again. And thank you very much.
Part of the benefits of us investing in the inner city, of course, is the contribution to regeneration. As we know, regeneration is not something that will happen overnight, because obviously the city took long to get to the state that it's in. But you can start to see pockets of improvement because of the consistent investment that we're putting in the inner city.
I think we have to respond to the call of the National Development Plan. Transformation is a challenge for all of us. We have to respond to the obligations that we all have in respect of what the Constitution demands of us. We know where we are coming from, and we know what the challenge is.
For us, a critically important thing, because it means that social housing doesn't just do the job of shelter, it also does the job of helping to transform areas, helping to use government investment alongside other forms of private and government investment to make areas better, and in the process of doing, to ensure a space for people who are on low and moderate incomes. NASHO is the Federation of Social Housing Organizations, and those are the organizations who are responsible to facilitate the development of social housing stock and also to take on the long-term management, which is very, very critical if we're going to make the government's investment work over the longer period. And the mandate of our organization is really to help build a strong and sustainable social housing sector that can provide good quality rental housing for people on low and moderate incomes in well-located parts of the city. And the reason for this is because historically South Africa has had a very divided type community, and what we're wanting to do is to make sure that people have greater access to the social and economic resources of our larger cities in the country.
So it's the shrine.
Oh, she knows. Oh, okay. So same for me this time. Also, I just need to type this up. I bone copy in it. Try executives to respond.
Sorry, listen, it does seem like we have a technical issue with the video. It has just suddenly come to a stop. I don't know if everyone is having the same challenge or it's just my end.
Also on this side,
okay.
Yeah, the video stopped.
Can you see the? Can you see
the? John.
Hello. So
yes.
Currently you can't see anything on the screen.
We can
see. We can see, but it's just frozen.
Okay.
You see the three gentlemen, and there's no movement.
Okay, perhaps we can go on, and then I will play it again at a later stage.
Okay. All right. Apologies, everyone, for that. Technology somehow has its own way. We sat on Friday and tested things, and this morning we are taken by surprise. But nonetheless, this was just the intent to basically reiterate what Cheryl has been taking us through the presentation. So we have not lost much in terms of the video. Hopefully we are able to still show it before we end the session today. If not, we start with that first thing tomorrow as well. Cheryl, I do hope that you are ready with the second and last part of the presentation, which then take us to the end of the session 12.
Okay. Can people hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Yes.
Just go back to my presentation. Okay. You know, when you begin to see things like that video, you saw that that particular project was in an inner city. And it goes to show how innovative social housing is because you'll find, like in Pretoria, there's this piece of land and social housing can be put up there. It is close to the economic hub. People can walk to work. They don't need to take transport. It's just one example, and I'm hoping somewhere further we can actually also show you social housing institutions products that were built closer to the inner city where there were public hostels and there was a piece of land. So you've integrated that old traditional way of where we had these hostels full of men and it's one room and 80 men there and their families are staying somewhere else, and these particular people are working within your particular city but are separated. So you can see what previous government did in terms of breaking up families, making men live on their own, women live on their own. And now you see with social housing, those vast pieces of land on those hostel properties have been put up as social housing institutions. You now have that man who was having his own way of thinking, and his wife is out there in some other province. He now brings his family into these social housing units. So do you, just from that particular example, you can see how this particular program begins to break down those barriers that were put in place, where families can live together. Even the social structure of the families begin to change. So I'm sure in tenant management, you begin to hear more about programs you then have to put in place so that you can ensure integration of women into those hostels. So it's a very exciting environment and product that one can begin to go into. My next, why am I stuck now? Sure. I want to go to my next. My next section is going to talk about some of the important people in the sector and what their roles are. So it's important that you also know who are the key role players in the sector and that you understand it. I'll start off with the SHRA, and the SHRA really gets its mandate from the Act. It is established as per the Act. So I'll start off with the SHRA, and then I'll look at other sectors, other government departments, private sector, and the different roles each one plays. Let me just go into this. Okay. And if you go back to the Social Housing Act, you will see in the Act, it specifically defines functions of different government departments. It defines the function of national, provincial, your municipality in respect of social housing. It also defines the establishment of the Social Housing Regulatory Authority, whom we will refer to the SHRA, what their role is and what they need to do. And it also says that social housing needs to be regulated. I spoke about providing for restructuring zones. Now, I want to talk specifically about the SHRA. Because, yes.
sorry to disturb you, but there's a saying whose mic is on and it keeps interfering. Some of the things you're saying we can't hear. Can you please
okay.
mute? Okay, thank you, Zane. Yes, it's done now.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Sorry, shall
you. Okay, do you need me to just go back a bit? Or is it clear?
No, it's fine. It's fine, you can continue.
Okay. All right. So really, it's important that we know what SHRA's role is in terms of legislation, because they are the custodians of social housing in the country. They ensure that it's regulated, they ensure there's funding, they ensure accreditation. So they've got a very, very important role to play. In fact, they are one of your most critical stakeholders for social housing to be implemented in your provinces or wherever you are. Now, the SHRA derives its mandate from different pieces of legislation. Obviously, the Constitution determines how we need to deliver products. All those things, those principles of the Constitution will cut across social housing and how the SHRA carries out its responsibilities. You find in the Social Housing Act, Rental Act, the Public Finance Management Act is very important because the SHRA distributes this restructuring grant funding. So that's actually from national government. So that's actually public money. And we all know that in terms of how you manage and distribute public spending is stipulated in the PFMA. So the SHRA also derives its mandate from there. I spoke about the social housing policy. I'll go into detail in terms of the functions, not great detail, but to give you an overview of the functions of the SHRA in terms of legislation. So it's leadership and accountability in the sector. Within the SHRA, they have a corporate services function, which really is an internal support function. They have accreditation, they have a compliance, they have institutional investment, and they have capital investment. Capital investment is really the investment into the project, the building and the construction of the project. Institutional investment is really about developing the sector. We'll go into it in our next discussions, how, and I think John will also tell you at the end of our presentation tomorrow, what type of support the SHRA can provide and who the responsible people are. Compliance is important because if you are accredited, there's certain standards and norms that you need to adhere to. They will give you, for example, and say, your rent collection must be at 95%. If you are collecting at 60%, it means you are not complying. And what are the things that you're going to put in place? So compliance of the sector is very, very important. Now, if we just look at the SHRA's programs in that graph, I gave you kind of the core programs. The first one is really the SHRA's internal support services. They call it corporate. That's their finance, risk, human resource, their IT. So this is the internal functioning of the SHRA. Then the other program you will find is the CEO's office that looks at the strategic planning, policy, research, performance information, monitoring, evaluation, stakeholder management, and so forth. That office plays a strategic role in terms of the sector. Now, these are very important programs for us and for people who are interested in getting into the sector or are in the sector. The one program is compliance, accreditation, and regulation. So this looks at regulation of social housing, the accreditation of social housing institutions and the projects, and compliance and monitoring. So these are the ones that you will interact with the most, in whether you institutions or you are building social housing. Then this is sector development, which promotes the growth and development of the sector, the growth and development of your institutions, coordination and management of the investment grants, and sector transformation and empowerment. Now, what we are doing today and what John's department is doing is really running one of these, this training program as part of the growth and development of the sector. So the SHRA is really investing in the training of institutions. So this is just but one of example. Then there's your project development and funding. And this really is the unit or the program that looks at the project packaging, the capital grant, the contract management, the implementation of that development, the building, maintaining of partnerships with provinces, municipalities, funding agencies. These are all critical in terms of when you are putting a project up. So your municipalities, your provinces are important. So there's a program within the SHRA that actually looks at all of that. Does anybody have any questions with regards to the SHRA? Then I can move up to other stakeholders in the sector that are going to be important to you. You kind of get an understanding of what the SHRA's function is. Are you okay?
Maybe just to add to what you have presented, Cheryl, just to say that in those three last departments that you have spoken of, experience tells us that anyone who is either coming through and is seeking to get themselves accredited as a social housing institution, or anyone who has a potential social housing project, the first of the three departments that you interface with would be the Compliance and Accreditation and Regulations Unit. In particular, the colleagues that are responsible for the accreditation process, with the ones that you interface with. And I think even at the close, I'll just perhaps share the contact details, because within the SHRA, there are about, 45 people employed here. So it would be useful, I guess, if we share with you the direct contact numbers and email addresses of the people or the process owners, so that you do not get yourself confused into move with some of the things that this training may be bringing forward. But yeah, just note that the first most likely department that you're going to find that you need to interface with before you even get to project development and so forth is the guys that are doing accreditation in the regulations unit.
Thanks, John. Okay, so let us look at other role players in the sector, critical role players. You have your national departments of housing, of human settlements. I'm so used to saying housing, of human settlements. Your provinces, your municipalities, and I've just spoken about the SHRA and their importance. You have your social housing institutions, and you'll see as we talk, we call them ODAs, but really those are our other development agencies that can come from the private sector. You will see how critical your financiers are, that is your banks and so forth. And also project steering committees on a national and a provincial level. And you heard in the video, there's this organization called NASHO. What is their role? The National Housing Task Team. So these are all stakeholders that you will interact with in terms of social housing. Now, remember, I said to you, in terms of government departments, that's national, provincial, and municipalities. It is very clear in the Act what their responsibilities are. We know that national government is the main, the national government, National Department of Human Settlements, as the lead department in terms of social housing. Remember that all the provinces, they set up the policies, the regulations, the funding from the SHRA comes from national government. And if you look at how the accountability in terms of national government, the national minister must account to the president. They then also have to account to parliament. Their budgets get approved in parliament. So within that housing budget, there will be social housing budgets as well that get approved from that level and then distributed to the SHRA or the provinces or whoever that is delivering housing. But specifically for social housing, that money will then come to the SHRA, who's then responsible for then funding the various projects in the country. So they are obviously, it's compliance, gazetting and approving the restructuring zones. I spoke about the allocation of funds, determining the norms and standards, and to also coordinate, guide, and manage rental housing programs. They also have to ensure alignment to legislation. They do look at the wider sector policies. The wider sector research sometimes is done by national in terms of social housing. Now within national, you'll have your national rental housing task team. And these are the people that I was talking about, this group that will begin to look at how to achieve social housing nationally across the country. And you'll see that there are a lot of social housing units in certain provinces and certain provinces lag behind. So they will look at how do we get all the provinces up to speed in terms of social housing. They look at performance policy in the sector. So within that, there's a task team that looks at that. Then we have our provinces who are very, very critical role players for social housing institutions. We don't engage so much with national, but our provinces are very critical because they look at that we are complying with the social housing norms. They also look at the growth of the sector, mediating in conflict. They submit the proposals of the restructuring zones to ministers. So you'll have the municipalities identifying restructuring zones. This goes to province, and then municipalities and province coordinate, and they then say, these are our restructuring zones. They submit it to the minister for approval. They also monitor social housing projects to see that there's compliance. But there's this provincial steering committee, not all, I'm not sure, John, whether they've all got them now, but there are certain provinces that have set up project steering committees.
It must have served at the PSC and must have received the nod from the PSC. So, you know, what we've always said that for those people who are for the first time coming into the sector and want to be contributors in the program, it is also perhaps useful for one to attend and get a sense and you know, get a sense of what is this and how does this body work in terms of assisting you as a potential developer or a program delivery agent to facilitate the development of the project. So we will share with you the lists of the different PSCs in the country. in fact, the contact details of the chairpersons. So if you have a project, let's say in Polokwane, which is one of the restructuring zone, you'll have the list of who the chair of that PSC is. I must also though highlight that other provinces are functioning far much better than other provinces. So you will find that that is but one of the few challenges that the program is still sitting with, where in some provinces the PSCs are not as sharp and as fast moving as in other, some you find in some of the provinces as well. So I've just jotted in my list of things to share with people. Would also be the contact list of the chairpersons of the PSCs, so that they can share with you the schedule of when the PSC sits, and maybe you can make time to attend one of the PSCs just as an observer.
Now that's a very good point that John is making, and unfortunately, because of us doing it doing it virtual, it was also nice in other provinces where we did training, is because we had some of these representatives from the PSC, so they gave lots of information and direction in terms of what people can do. Okay, let's look at our municipalities. Now, the municipality for me is very, very critical. And I will speak about it from the institution itself, which is your local government, but also because you have a political environment there as well, who impacts your project locally. And I'm talking about people like your local councillors. So your municipality is a very, very critical role player. They can assist with the identification of land. We know there's a lot of municipal owned land that can be used for social housing. Municipalities own buildings, which can be converted into social housing units within inner cities. You'll see in some of the provinces, there are actually buildings, office buildings, that have been, maybe the municipality buys them over, or they take them because the owners have ran away and left them derelict and so forth. And they then take those buildings and give it to institutions to convert them into social housing units. So they are very, very critical role player. And specifically when it comes to municipal infrastructure and services for your approved projects. So when you've got a development, you must ensure that you have the water connection, the electricity connection, the roads, the approval of roads, and so forth and so forth. So they're very, very critical. Also, to ensure that there are no blockages, that these projects move very quickly and the approvals are done on time. I did speak about initiating and motivating identification of restructuring zones. Your municipality can do that. And like I said also earlier, there's a lot of public hostels, previous public hostels, for example, that were owned by municipalities where they're now converting those, but you'll find that there's a huge empty piece of land that can be used for social housing. So it's very important that you also begin to engage with your municipalities to look at where opportunities are. And for you to also give some input. You know, you'll find your municipalities do things like IDPs and whatever, integrated development plans, where they go into communities and communities give input. It's very important that people in the sector also give input in terms of where social housing opportunities where they are, where the municipality can begin to release buildings, release pieces of unused land. And when I'm saying that, you find that there's a hostel, and on that piece of land, there's a huge space where we can then also densify and put social housing.
There is a hand up, Ondela, if you want to perhaps come through at this point.
Hi, John. Hi, Cheryl. Thank you. I hope this is not a stupid question. I just want to find out, I mean, if now you say you identify land in whatever area it is, am I correct in saying that the first place that you go to, within this whole process would be the municipality? If you identify an area to check if it's a restructuring zone, or if you want to, check the restructuring zones in that area, so meaning that you need to go to a municipality of that area.
Cheryl, you want to
I think there's, for me, there's, in government, there's always two sectors or a whole lot. You find in province, everything is consolidated on a provincial level, right? Because there are very municipalities and local structures that fit into. So if you want to see overall for the province, you can go to province and you get the picture of the province. But on a local basis, your municipality will have the local information. Do you see what I'm saying? So whether you start off at province, it's also good to go to the local level. Like I'm saying, there are some places where some areas weren't even identified as possible restructuring zones because they meet some of those criteria we spoke about. And it's through initiation from communities, no? Where they say, but why is this not a restructuring zone? Because it's near to the place. Do you see what I'm saying? So
100%.
Your involvement is very, very important because sometimes things are missed and you can see potential and opportunities, but it's not a restructuring zone. So it means you then initiate your municipalities to look at that piece of area, to look at that building if it's not a restructuring zone. Does it meet these criteria? And they can begin to make those submissions. But I think they've progressed and advanced quite extensively now in terms of identifying restructuring zones. But I know in the past it was institutions that pushed municipalities and the provinces to begin to say that this piece it's on the transport node, it's near economic thing, it meets this, but it's not a restructuring zone. So that's
perfect.
What you can do. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you.
Cheryl, if I may also just add to the land question and land issue. Colleagues, I think we also need to note that one of the serious challenges that us as a program are facing is that the program is not performing at the rate at which it's meant to. Last MTSF period of 5 years, I think from 2014 to 2019, we had to deliver as a program 27,000 social housing units. And we came short of that performance of that target. This current MTSF, which started a year ago and will go on until I think 2024, 2025, the target still stands that we need to deliver 30,000 units. And we are still in the middle of it, so it's hard to tell you how we're doing. But I can tell you for sure that one of the inhibiting factors in terms of how the program has performed thus far is the issue of access to land and buildings. So take note of that, especially those of you who are potential developers who may be wanting to try this space, that there is that challenge around access to land where these things can be developed. In the policy, it's clear, as Cheryl is presenting to us, that the municipalities are the first port of call or places that we can engage and get access to land and buildings from. However, even though this is on paper, we do note that in some municipalities, yes, that seems to work fairly well, where municipalities are identifying very proactively and have a land pipeline that they make available in a proactive manner to social housing institutions and developers that are wanting to bring through social housing stock. However, don't limit yourself only to municipalities. I mean, yes, in policy, they are the first, I think, port of call and they're the ideal suppliers of land. Social housing can also be developed on private land, so long as the key criteria, which is that that land is sitting in a restructuring zone, is met, or that tick box is ticked. So private, we know that there are private people who own land and buildings that they usually put on sale or on auction. So look at those as well. Provinces as well, we know that some provinces own and hold land as well, so that there are land parcels and buildings that you can look at in that a province may or have in their balance sheet that they can release for this purpose. We have an institution, in fact, within the human settlement value chain of among the entities, which is the HDA, Housing Development Agency. They do a lot of land banking and so forth, and we are as a SHRA still engaging with them as well to say, how do we work hand in hand as sister companies to ensure that we have a build of a land pipeline that can be proactively made available. And I know, of course, other than just those few lists that few entities or departments that I've mentioned, we also have state-owned entities such as your PRASA, your Telcom and so forth, who also have land. So I'm just pointing it out that when you start to engage, particularly around the land issue, don't just restrict yourself and your view only to municipalities. There are quite a wide range of partners or stakeholders that you can engage, so long as that land is sitting in a restructuring zone. And remember, as I committed, we'll share with you a list of what these restructuring zones are in the country wide. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, John, for that.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Yeah. What's also important, and I think people tend to forget, the first thing as institutions, we look for this vacant piece of land. But when you're starting off, the opportunity is there for converting a building. You can start with your first 100 units and taking our office block and converting it into a building. You can, like John saying, some of them can be from the municipality, some of them you can even buy and it becomes part of your project packaging the cost of the building and to convert it. So there are those opportunities that we need to look at.
Oh, Cheryl, I think you are on mute.
Myself, I didn't want to go into great detail because I think in the other trainings in your tenant management and so forth, and when you talk about stakeholder engagement, they'll go more into detail. But just so that you're aware is that the municipality as an institution has a role to play, but I did speak a bit about the political arm. That is your ward councillors. And we are saying some of the challenges, and I'll talk a bit about those tomorrow, is really about if your ward councillors don't buy into social housing, that it can sometimes affect social housing in an area, whether your project is successful or not. So when you are developing social housing, it's important that you speak to your local ward councillors so that they are a support to you in terms of the development, but we know the dynamics around that, them wanting to push their people. So you're going to have to deal with all of that on a project level when you're building, and them giving you lists and so forth. And when you have tenanted your building and the tenants don't pay rent and you need to evict and so forth, and the role that they will play in either supporting you or supporting the tenants. So they are a very critical role player to bring in the beginning so that they can support whatever it is that you're doing. I'm write a bit about this because it's not in legislation, but I just thought, let me just make you aware of that, is that the municipality really, there's two things. There's the political and there's the administrative function that can impact on your social housing project. Okay, so let me move to my next slide. We have what we call ODAs, other delivery agents. This can be your private sector. These guys undertake accredited social housing projects. That's what their role is. So what does this mean? This means that they have maybe the resources, the capacity, or private land, and they go to the SHRA and then they get those projects accredited so that they can build social housing. Sometimes they build and manage, or they build and then they hand it over to a social housing institution to manage. So you get those that will just build, and then you get those that will build and manage, and you get those that build and hand over to another institution to manage that stock. Now, let us look at social housing institutions. They're very, very important because they develop, they manage the social housing projects. They've also got to reinvest whatever operational surpluses there are in their social housing projects back into the project. What does this actually mean? It means that when you charge rent, and say your rent is 20,000 a month that you collect and your operating costs are 10,000 Rand a month. You have 10,000 Rand surplus. It means you can't take that 10,000 Rand surplus and distribute it amongst the directors or whoever. That 10,000 has to be reinvested into those social housing projects. That means you're taking the money, you're putting it away for your long-term maintenance when you're going to repaint your building, but they'll go into that in property management into greater detail. I just wanted to give you an understanding of what that actually means. They've got to comply with accreditation requirements. When you an accredited institution, you'll see later on in my slide, there are certain things that you got to comply with and that you got to report to the SHRA. There are certain things that you got to comply with in terms of legislation, in terms of norms, in terms of standards, in terms of benchmarks. Also, the annual performance agreements with local authorities on social housing. For example, if you're a municipal-owned social housing institution, you've got to comply with the reporting of the municipality as well. You've got to report to council how you spent the money, what your projects are. So you'll have lots of accountability if you're a municipal-owned entity. So when it is reporting to local authorities, that's just one of the examples I'm giving you. Consulting with the residents in social housing, and this is very important in tenant management. You'll see a lot of this coming out, how you manage your tenants, how your tenants participate in a meaningful way in social housing. Now this is in, oh my Lord, why is my battery running low? John, why is my battery running low? Sorry guys, I just want to see. Okay, I'm just sorry that I ran off. It looks like my battery, my battery is running a bit low. Sorry. Just check there, John. Sorry, guys. Let me just unmute myself. My apologies. I've just got to. Sorry about that, guys. Just a bit of a glitch. What I was saying is that, just to recap, is that it is in the legislation and in the Act where it specifically says that institutions and where there's social housing projects, there needs to be active and meaningful engagement with the citizens and the tenants. In terms of informing residents on issues relating to consumer protection. Remember I said to you, if you are renting, it means there's a legal contract between the landlord and the tenant. So you need to be ensuring that that person knows what their rights and responsibilities are in terms of the agreement, and they need to know what your rights and responsibilities are. And the protection of consumers is very, very important. Operating within best practice in terms of the norms, the standards, and in terms of the industry. That's one of their responsibilities, and compliance. So there's a lot of things that social housing institutions are responsible for. It is the money they get, it is managing those properties, it is complying to legislation. It's about ensuring that your tenants and communities are participating, the building is well managed, that the people are living in a safe and healthy environment. That's the responsibility of the institutions managing those properties. Now we come to a next group, which we call our financiers. These are the people that fund the development of social housing. Now there's various people in the sector. You get your National Housing Finance Corporation, we just call them NHFC, and we've just given you some of them. The Gauteng Partnership Fund, the Development Bank of South Africa, and our banks, the normal commercial lenders. And when we talk about project accreditation tomorrow, I will give you some indication of what the percentage of funding must come from your finances, which we call our debt funding. But we'll talk a bit about that tomorrow. But I'm just showing you who are some of the most important organizations. We spoke a bit about NASHO. They call the National Association of Social Housing Institutions, associations, I call it associations. So what generally happens is that social housing institutions become members of NASHO. So they really represent the sector and they coordinate on behalf of institutions. They campaign and lobby. They promote the sector. They also report on compliance. They do a bit of research in the sector. And I've given you an example was in the Act, it said that the maximum amount was 7.5 in terms of people's income to qualify to go into social housing, that could live in a social housing project. But because of the lobbying and the coordination of institutions then lobbied and coordinated for that through SHRA to be increased to 15,000, because we at the background, we informed why we are saying this. So they're a very good organization to have on board when it comes to lobbying, when it comes to changing legislation, when it comes to the challenges and the impact legislation has on the sector. So it's good to become a member of NASHO. Okay, I'm want to just recap, and if there's questions, I'll take the questions, because let me just see how much time we've got left. We've got about an hour till 12 o'clock, because I want to get into accreditation of institutions. This is a very, very important section for you guys to understand what are the criteria, how you go about becoming accredited. But I just want to recap before I move on to that critical section, is that this particular section, we've been talking about the critical stakeholders, the role of the SHRA, what type of programs are in the SHRA, the role of your provincial government, your national government, your municipalities, your financiers, your NASHO, the social housing institutions. That's really what we were talking about in this section. And if you go into your manual, you can read further and recap in terms of who plays what role in the sector. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to the next section?
No, no questions this side.
Everybody's fine. I must get used to this virtual thing, because when I'm in the class,
The thing is
more interactive, eh?
Cheryl, normally when we're in a virtual session, we normally muted, and then there's normally a Q&A at the end, but I think most of us are fine. You're really doing a good job.
Oh, Cheryl, I think you're on mute.
You're on mute,
Sorry, oh God, I've got to get used to this. It's good to touch base before I move on when I'm finished the section, so that people understand. I get very worried. I'm not used to this virtual thing. So when people are very quiet, I'm just seeing the screen. So when people are quiet, I need to know I haven't lost you, that you're still on track and you understand what it is I was saying. Okay, thanks guys. Let me move to the next section, which is around accreditation for institutions. So this one you must take note of and really pay attention to this section. You'll see in your manual, I've summarized the presentation, but when you get your manuals, you'll see exactly which pages in the manuals go into much more detail. Now, when I was presenting the Act and what social housing is all about, one of the things that's in the Act is that if you want to deliver social housing projects or either manage them, or you want to be a social housing institution, the Act is very clear and it says you have to be an accredited institution. So in this section, I'm really going to look at what are the qualifying criteria to become an accredited social housing institution. And you'll see the Act has regulations, and the regulations obviously talk to the Act. So that's how the sector is regulated. So just to give you an overview for an institution is that it must be a legal form. Means it must be a registered institution, either with the Companies Act or whatever way you are going to register. It has to be not-for-profit. Remember I was saying that whatever surplus is made has to be reinvested back into the institution. It has to have governance structures in place. It has to be financially sustainable, because if you are not financially sustainable, it means you cannot deliver on your services. You cannot maintain your property. So it's very important that the institution is financially sustainable. If you are not collecting your rent, you will not be financially sustainable. Tenant management is how do you manage your tenant? What policies, procedures, what programs do you have in place in terms of tenant management? There's property management and property development. So there are specific things that you have to comply with in each of these sections here. And like I was saying earlier on, the SHRA has put in place trainings for tenant management, property management, and in development, they're looking at things like project financial viability and project packaging. That is in the development part. So let's just move on to what does it mean to set up a legal entity and what type of entity it should be. It can be a company limited, a Section 21 cooperative, share block company, communal property association, a trust, a non-profit company under the New Companies Act. Now, most social housing institutions register as Section 21, but there are some that register as non-profit companies under the New Companies Act. Now, the Section 21 part is and has an advantage in terms of tax and the tax compliance with SARS when it comes to social housing. There are some institutions, like I know the one I come from was registered as a company because it was a municipal owned entity. So there was a lot of tax compliance with regards to that. But the best advice is to register as a Section 21 non-profit. Now, in my one section, I spoke about the legal entity. What type of institution are you going to be? Non-profit company, a legal entity. That means you have to register one. Then you have to set up governance structures. Now, wherever there is public money, governance becomes a very, very important aspect. That means that that SHI must be independent from other entities, except a municipal owned one, like I said, where they can be owned by the municipality, but they're still a separate entity. They must have good policies in place in terms of their operations. They must have a board of directors or some governing body in place with clear mandates and committees in place with clear terms of references. What is this committee for? What is their terms of reference? Even going as far as in terms of their authority, how if and for example, if a project is X amount, it has to go through certain structures and who says the final approval and so forth. Those are all your governance structures. If you have a board, there must be a board charter, a code of conduct for board members. There must be a business strategy for that institution. It must be developed and in place. And normally that strategy is approved by the board, and the board also participates in the development of that strategy. I know when this is the start of this always is the most daunting, but when you break it down and you take this elephant and you break it down into smaller pieces when you start off, you will find that there are already these things in place. There are a lot of there's a lot of information in terms of policies and whatever that in place. There's a lot of board charters in place in social housing institutions, business strategies and so forth. It's about you taking all of that and then streamlining it or structuring it specifically for your institution. So it's not like you will start on a blank where you don't know Arthur or Martha. There's just a lot of information out there how you begin to put policies in place. There must be a staffing and performance management in place for that SHI. What does that mean? That means whoever's the CEO, the director, or the head of that institution needs to report to the board in terms of, and to the SHRA. How are we performing? Submit our finances, financial statements so that the board can monitor. Are we financially sustainable? Are we collecting our rent and so forth? So governance structures, very, very important, and it's legislated. So you have to put this in place when you want to be accredited as a social housing institution. And a business strategy is really about where are you going to position yourself. You can't just one day say, hey, I want to be a social housing institution. You have no idea what your target areas are going to be, where you're going to build, what is your long-term vision for it, how many units do you want to build in the next 5 years, are there opportunities in your province, in your local area? So unless you unpack that, you're not going to have your roadmap for your institution in terms of, this is where I'm going to start, but my long-term dream is to be managing 2,000 units in Port Elizabeth or the Eastern Cape in the next 10 years. Do you get what I'm saying? So those are the things that you need to sit and begin to talk about with, and also identifying people who you'll have on your board. And you have to pick people who are going to add value. You cannot, for example, say, I'm going to take, you know what, that friend of mine that works at Checkers as a teller, I'm going to make her a board member. You're going to have to look at what skills do I require for my board. Look at your community. I need to look at risk. I need to look at finances. I need to look at projects. So you bring on board people that understand the development part of projects. You bring in people who have the necessary skills in accounting. You bring in people with the necessary skills in risk. Sometimes accounting and risk can go together. You bring in people with skills that understand community dynamics, that understand social facilitation, community development, engagement. You bring in those people that will add value to your organization. Please interrupt, or if you want to ask me a question. So that's in terms of governance.
Cheryl, I'm glad that you have emphasized the skills composition or the competency composition of board members. And I think we've seen that in many or a couple of instances where as a SHRA we receive applications for potential or aspiring institutions, that some do not really apply effort and mind to how they compose the board. And of course, they would go to that model of just picking up anyone from checkers and so forth and so forth. So that's an area, colleagues, that, and it by no means giving, suggesting that we saying have a big, board. I think as a startup, the idea is to have at most four or five people, but really right skills that are going to help push the formulation of your strategy, but also making sure that all these critical elements that Cheryl has spoken about, like finance, property development, community and legal issues, can have someone who can play an oversight role on these issues. We know that without those skills, without having those kind of competencies, that sometimes frustrates your development as an emerging and a startup in SHI.
I think especially that finance skill is very, very important, guys, because that is the person in your board. Remember that some of us that are doing social housing or whatever, we may just know a little bit, but they are able to identify the risks or foresee risks for the organization in the next couple of months or whatever, and can then make the board and make management alert management of possible areas there where you're going to run into trouble, and can also give direction and strategy for the organization. So I would say two key ones for me when you start off is a finance and property management development. For me, those are two critical skills that you must bring in at the beginning. When you're bigger, you can bring in more. But when you start off, is to really look at those ones that understand construction, that understand property management, because really that is your core business as a social housing institution, is developing the properties and managing them and ensuring that you're in a financial position to ensure sustainability of that organization. So for me, those are the ones that I would seriously bring in first though. And also under governance, we talk about integrity standards, codes of conduct, legal compliance. Integrity and standards is very, very important, because again, I'm saying to you, this is public money, and how the institution spends that money is very, very important, because these are the things that SHRA is going to look at, that you have to comply with, that the rental money that you're getting is reinvested, that it's not given to the CEO or a board member. Whatever surpluses you make is reinvested into that institution. Also looking at things like conflict of interest and the systems that you have in place. Because imagine if you don't have a conflict of interest policy, and you have a board member or the chairperson of your board has a construction company, right? And he then says, let me do the construction of this project. Do you understand? So it's important that you put those policies in place so people who are in management, who are on your board, there's no conflict of interest in terms of the running of the organization and the projects and so forth. It's just to divorce those two so you don't run into problems and difficulties. an adequate risk management system. So it's having a risk management policy. How will you manage these risks? I know that's, like I said, sounds daunting, but it's not, because when you begin to look at what others have, what the SHRA has, it's going to be very easy for you to put those things in place for your institution that you want to start. Now we come to an important one where we talk about financial sustainability. So it means your financial business plan, which looks at your forecasting. Remember I said in your strategic plan, you must have objectives, you must have a long-term plan. Where do I want to see ourselves in the next 10 years? So a financial plan will say in the next 10 years, when I have 2,000 units, this will be my projected rent income, my projected expenses, the projected number of staff that I'm going to have, and this is how much it's going to cost me. Because you are looking at long-term sustainability of your organization or your institution. Having your policies, your procedures, your accounting policies, procedures in place. In your manual, this goes into a bit more detail, so please read it. Also making provision for your long-term maintenance plan. Remember I said to you, you need to ensure that your projects retain their value. That means you must be able to say in the next, my long-term maintenance plan says in the next 10 years, I've got to paint, I've got to do roofs, I've got to do gutters or whatever, whichever year it falls into. It means in your financial plan, you must make provision for those things. Are people with me? So you must say, if I'm going to paint in the next 10 years, I must put X amount of money away so that I'm able to paint my units when the time comes for me to do painting. So the financial planning is very important. So you must be able to show the SHRA in terms of your policies, your financial plan, and so forth. What is it that you are going to do? Okay, financial management, it's your reporting, how you're going to report, your systems. When you're starting off, you are not going to have things like, for example, audited financial statements, internal audit, and so forth. This is more for institutions that already exist, have been accredited, but maybe they've received conditional accreditation or they've received full accreditation. It means when they apply for accreditation again, they must be able to say, these are my internal auditors and so forth, because it's only when you're in existence that you begin to have things like internal auditors, and normally it's only big institutions that have internal auditors, but it must be your external auditors that will audit your financial statements and so forth. So normally for a startup, you're not going to be submitting audited financial statements because you won't have those. You just have a concept, a plan, an idea, and you've identified land. And then you get your money and you start being an institution that is off the ground, that's employed people, that's now got a project on board, that you begin to have those other things in place. I spoke about audited annual financial statements and safeguarding the public investment. I will always emphasize in terms of it's a lot of money that is being put into investing into that project or into that building. So it's very, very important that we safeguard that asset. That you've got to meet the thresholds or the financial performance indicators of the SHRA. Again here, this will be for existing institutions that are being re-accredited. So this section really is for those in existence. Any questions, guys, before I move to the next one? Are we still fine? We still fine? Okay. So let me go to tenant management. And this is a core delivery of a social housing institution. Is how do you manage your tenants? How do you deliver the service to your tenants? So what will be required is that there's a staffing and a resource plan in place for your institution to deliver the services. There's a tenant management plan. There's marketing of those units. So what will you have? You'll have a marketing policy. You will have a letting policy, especially when you're starting off to get accredited. You put these things in place. Your letting policy, your marketing policy, your allocation policy, your lease agreement, your complaints management system, how are you going to manage complaints, which really is a procedure that you put in place. So when you get a complaint, how long will it take you to respond to a complaint, and so forth and so forth. How are you going to do communication? That you put into your communications policy with procedures of how you do communication. How will you resolve disputes internally, externally? Again, this will be a dispute management policy with the procedures in place. So your policy and your procedures when you start up. And then an exit termination system means when somebody comes in, you let units, so you have a letting policy that says, this is how my letting policy works. These are the steps I follow. When a tenant exits my unit, what is required? It gives you 1 month's notice. What do? You snag the unit, he signs the unit, you refund his deposit. You know, all those things. You need to have those things in place, which are really your policy, your procedures when you are starting up for the first time to be accredited. And obviously your policy, when you are starting off, it's going to say, your tenant management policy will say, I will undertake tenant satisfaction surveys. When you're in existence, you then need to undertake those tenant satisfaction surveys, and you have buildings and you have tenants. You then do tenant satisfaction surveys. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in terms of what each of these things mean, because it's really in detail in your manual, but I would like us to engage so that you ask me questions where there are areas you don't understand. You also have to look at your tenant consultation and empowerment program. How do you provide tenant training? When you will provide tenant training? For example, let me give you an example. When you do applications, you now have your building. You now need tenants to tenant your building. What are the things you'll do? You'll market your project so that you have people that come, isn't it? You then put them through an application process. What are the documents that are required for your application process? I'm not going to go into detail because you'll get this in the tenant management training. What are the documents that you as an institution will require? How will you do credit vet that this is the right tenant for you? Those are all things that show in your policy and your procedure documents, okay? How is this tenant is going to sign a lease agreement? Before he goes into this unit, you are going to do tenant training. that tenant training is going to inform that person. Kanti, this is a rental project before they sign that lease. This is a rental project. Some people do it differently. What I did was I made them sign a training declaration that says, I understand that this is a rental project. I understand my responsibilities in terms of the lease agreement. I understand the payment of my rent and so forth and so forth. And they sign that declaration saying they understand it's rental. It helps you also when you in a court case and somebody then says, no, they didn't tell me this is rental. They said it's rent to own or rent to buy. Do you get what I'm saying? So you put the things in place to mitigate all those type of things. So your tenant is in. When your tenant wants to leave, these are the things that you do. So training of tenants is important in terms of the regulations in tenant management. Everybody fine with tenant management? Let me touch base with you.
Yes, still
Any
fine,
questions?
thank you.
Okay. Please don't fall asleep or dodge, no?
No, we're still here. We're still around.
You're still around. Okay.
Yep.
Because my voice can be so boring sometimes if I don't hear other people.
No, I understand what you mean, especially when you can't hear the responses and the and the yeah and yes. So we're still here. Don't worry. You're on mute, Cheryl. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. Whether some are sleeping or disappeared, went to have lunch or coffee, I won't know, and I'm talking to myself, so I worry. Okay, guys, let's move on to the next arm. This is property management. This is also core services for a social housing institution. Tenant management, property management is a core service. Now here, really for a startup, when you're starting up, you need to develop policies and procedures for your property management. It's going to include things like how you're going to manage maintenance, how you're going to manage rentals, how are you going to manage your vacancies, what system are you going to use, how are you going to manage tenant turnover, and so forth and so forth. So your property management really looks at this asset. What are the services that I'm going to deliver? Now, in social housing, you'll have things like your maintenance, which is broken down into various types of maintenance. You'll have reactive, you'll have planned maintenance, you'll have emergency maintenance, and you'll have upkeep. Upkeep maintenance will include things like cleaning of your buildings, cutting of your grass. You'll also look in terms of the security system you'll put in place, the type of services, security guards, and things that you're going to put in place. So really, property management is looking at how are you going to ensure that you maintain the value of this asset. How often are you going to do building inspections or condition inspections? The servicing of your fire equipment. If you have lifts, the servicing of your lifts, the servicing of smoke detection. If you are in a building in the inner city, for example, you must have smoke detection. So all those things are included in your property management policies and procedures. What this is just telling you is when you are developing these things, you need to look at all of these sections. How will you acquire? How will you dispose? The life cycle of your asset and so forth. Also in property management, you have to look at the complaints management system, how will you handle maintenance complaints in your institution? Now, most institutions, when they're up and running and have projects, will put in a property management system where you actually can log in a maintenance. How long does it take you to respond for an emergency? For example, some people say we'll do it in 24 hours. If it's not urgent, it will be done in 4 days. If it's not that urgent or life-threatening, we'll do it within 7 days. So those are all the systems and things that you must put in place as an institution. How will you, in your policy, handle different types of maintenance? What will be your turnaround times? And again here, these things are in existence, and when you attend property management training, you're going to get more information on this so that you are able to develop and examples of policies so that you are able to develop policies that suit your organization. Okay, it also talks about rental management. How will you collect your rent? How will you set your rent? The increasing of your rent. How will you collect rent? Vacancy management. For example, what is the turnover? How many, you may be running a social housing institution. These are things that you have to measure. You find that I've now allocated my units are full, but why are my tenants leaving? And I can't get people to come and stay in my property. So you need to ensure that when somebody's leaving, that you have some kind of exit interview or for them to say why they are leaving. And when you have high vacancy rate, all those things assist you in mitigating risks that may exist in terms of vacancy. And this is one thing that the SHRA is going to measure you on, is vacancy rates. Because if you have high vacancies, it means that you are losing rent. You are collecting 100% of your rent when your properties are 100% full. So if you're projecting 10,000 Rand a month for properties that are full, it means you must ensure that you have all your properties full. But we know people move. How long does it take me then to fill that unit so that you only lose income maybe for 1 month, because you must get that unit up to standard for the next tenant to come in. So vacancy rates are very, very, very important. If you have a high vacancy rate, you are losing money. If you project 10,000 to spend 8,000 and you are only getting 5,000, do you see how it impacts on your maintenance and it impacts on your services? People see that, eh? That you must ensure that your properties are full. Also, the efficiency and management of your services. When you're an institution, you need to decide. For example, you look at things like your security. Are you going to insource your security? Means I'll appoint a security, my own internal security guard, or am I going to outsource these services to a service provider? I'll contract a service provider. Which of these two are going to be cheaper for me? Outsourcing or employing my own guard? When they do this again in property management, it's something they'll go into detail with. But this is what it means where efficient management of your costs. It means that the services that you deliver are of quality, but they also effective and efficient, means you are getting value for money. How many of us pay so much for bad services? No? We are paying, or we don't want to pay and we get bad quality. So you have to ensure that you're managing your costs efficiently, but the quality of your service still meets the standards that are required of you. Let me see what's in here. Okay, let me touch base again. Under property management, are there any questions? But please attend the training, property management. I don't know when John and them will do it, because you're going to get more information around this section. What I'm really showing you here is that to be accredited, I must ensure I have policies, procedures around property management. I must have policies, procedures around tenant management, around governance. I must be a registered legal entity, because you have to submit those documents to the SHRA so that you can be accredited. Okay.
Sorry, Cheryl. I have got a question. It was on your tenant management subsection. What becomes of tenants that that their income increases over time? I mean, if somebody comes in at the family earning 14,000, for instance, and in the next 2 years they now earn 20-something thousand, what then happens to them?
Yeah, this has always been a debate. But it's what I normally advise people do. This is something that must be discussed from an institutional level with the board and the institution. You decide how you handle that. Because remember, one expects people's incomes to increase. Some institutions say, okay, we are only going to do a 2-year lease agreement or a 1-year lease agreement. But in terms of practice, it sounds nice on paper. And I will always give you things based on personal experience and practice. Sometimes you put things on paper. You will say, I'm going to give you a 2-year lease. And that means after 2 years, my lease expires. I've got to reapply if I want to stay in your institution. Now, look at this, and I want you to think carefully. Sometimes you will find that that tenant was your best tenant. They paid 100%. Now that tenant's income is 15,200 Rand, no? When he's reapplying. And you say, no, you gotta leave because you are 15,200 Rand. And he decides, no, you know what? I'm not going to go because you're unfair. And you say, no, I must go. So you say, okay, I'm going to do an eviction for you. Your eviction is going to cost you 80,000 Rand. Or it'll go on for 2-3 years and that person will still sit there and not pay a cent. So I'm saying
okay,
the most important thing, the most important thing for the SHRA is that when a person comes in, right, is that you comply. But the education of your tenants is also important. Because you need to say, guys, in your training, you need to include that component. These products are for people between this income group. Once your income starts increasing and so forth, then you need to begin to look at moving out, going to a private rental space or buying or whatever they decide. But I'm just giving you that on paper, you can have that, right? But on a practical level, it sometimes does not work out that way where they will leave. So what are you going to do? Do you, with your board, then say, okay, in terms of our policy, this is how we will handle cases. Do you see? And I cannot say, because each institution will then decide how do they handle that. Personally, me, what I used to do, if I included in, this was the limit in terms of the person's increase. But if they fall within that and they renewing, I'm going to re-sign the lease with them. Do you understand? Because I'll read.
Are there no implications to, let's say, the project owners of having, say, perhaps a number of people that are over that income group still staying in the development?
If I may,
there are no implications, but you have to monitor. You have to monitor it. For example, for the SHRA, the most important thing is when the person comes in, do they qualify?
Yes.
Right? They qualified. Everybody that's in your project earned less than 15,000. Now, 1 year, 2 year, maybe you do occupancy audits and you start seeing the income of your tenant's profile changing. No? There are some now that are 15,200. There are some that are whatever and fall out of your, say, your primary market. You know, that one's up to 5,500. Remember, when you start your project, you must have 30% of your tenants of that income group. So when you do an occupancy audit, you now find, yo, I've only got 20%. Because most of these people are now over 5,500. It is life and it's reality that people's salaries are going to increase. Somebody may get a promotion that you never know about while staying in your institution. And they in that primary market group. No? Means that maybe their rents are 600 Rand. And there, this person can get a promotion and earn 8,000 Rand. When are you going to find that out? So I'm saying it is all these things that an institution will have to look at and say, how am I going to mitigate these things? And sometimes common sense. If I've got a good tenant that's been paying my rent, that is up to date, and he's now 15,200, why will I kick him out of my project? But that's a board decision. Do you see what I mean? And then you find someone that's earning 15,200, but he's a defaulter of note. You understand? He's a bad tenant.
Could I make a comment,
So,
Cheryl?
yeah.
You know, from my side, I think it's a blessing if the social housing can be the instrument of change for that family where the family used to earn maybe a mediocre salary. And because of this, the impact of this decision of social housing, this family member could now be, their earning potential could grow. So from a one side, I agree in terms of the policy, but you know, if you look at a blessing that actually has taken place, I think that's the one of the reasons I believe why we enter into this space. We want our people that were on the outskirts of most cities. We want them to come to the inner city for their kids one day to also have a better earning potential. So, you know, this is one of the reasons why I'm attending today is I want to make a difference where we can be the change. Cheryl, thanks.
Cheryl, you are on mute.
I must get used to this. I know I'll digress a bit, and I normally say to people, if you go into this space, you must be passionate about wanting to make a difference and make a change. You can't go think, hey, I want money, I want to make bucks. Then you're in the wrong space. if you go into this, it's really about making a difference in people's lives. It's about taking that person out of that informal settlement and a back room where they were paying maybe 2,500 rand a month on one room, never had food, but they needed that roof. And because they fall into maybe that rental criteria of yours where they pay 650 a month, and you see them move there, and the day you hand them that key and you see the joy in that person's face and the pride and whatever of moving from where they were into this beautiful apartment. And there is no difference between what theirs look like from the someone with a higher income. Maybe it's just the finishes, the one has built-in cupboards or whatever. But you must have a passion, because in all of this, you are going to find tenants who are struggling to pay rent. Then you got to be creative and proactive, and you say, okay, my unemployed tenant, like COVID now, people have lost their jobs, right? It's a reality and it's a fact, and they are living in social housing institutions. What are you going to do as an institution? Are you going to kick everybody and everybody now because they lost their jobs? You have to be creative and innovative and care, because it's not because of their fault. It's this COVID that's caused this. What do? You start saying, my services for cleaning, I will employ so many tenants. You know what I'm saying? Let them set up companies, let them do your services. Over and above that, you bring in other people, and without costing you 1 cent. Your municipality, your province, economic development, they come in, they fund them, set up their businesses, they train them. Then you say to them, okay, besides this contract, go and look for contracts somewhere else, by the shops, the community, the where. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you've empowered that person, and you've not just thought of kicking them out. And I'm telling you right now, in also most social housing institutions during COVID must have been struggling, where people have lost their jobs. If my tenants are employed and I am running programs that ensure my tenants are employed, I get my rent money. It's as simple as that. I get my rent money. So you got to be creative. You've got to link up. You don't have to take 1 cent out, because I'm telling you, your municipalities, Department of Community Development's looking for programs to fund. Economic developers looking for programs to fund. Small business developments looking for programs to fund. You just network and you bring those government departments into your project. And they fund those initiatives, but you got to think out the box. So that's why I'm saying all of this, when somebody is over or whatever, it is an internal organization's decision that you need to look at the risks. Like I said, for me, I would say, if my tenant, the tenant is active, she participates, she pays her rent, now she's earning 15,200. You understand? So it's internal management decisions that you're going to make. Is it going to cost me more to evict this person and have a bad relationship because I'm saying I'm giving you 14 days to vacate, and they say I'm not going, and stay there and not pay your rent until you evict them after 2 years? What have you gained? So you got to be very strategic as an organization, as an institution. But look at it on the other way. If someone was now earning 100,000, why would I keep them in my project? Do you understand what I'm saying? So common sense sometimes needs to prevail. If I'm now earning 100,000 rand, I'm now a director somewhere, and I'm paying 1,600 rand. Really, that's immoral. So you counsel that person out of your unit, and you say it is immoral, you cannot be here. You get what I mean? So common sense must prevail in each of these. I hope I've answered your question there. Does that help?
Yes, Cheryl, very much. Thank you.
Okay. So if we look at property development, again here it is all the policies, procedures around property development. Some people even develop their standards and norms, but I know that the SHRA now is doing this for institutions, but institutions used to say, as an institution, this is going to be our design. This is going to be the quality. These are the type of products we'll put into our units. You will specify the type of taps, things. You get what I'm saying? Some people go so far. But I'm saying those are things that you as an institution need to look at. Some will say, we're only going to do phase brick. You know why? Because phase brick in the long term saves me on painting, blah, 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 instead of plastering. You get what I mean? So those are all things that you as an organization need to think of on a strategic level. But to be accredited, you need to have a development policy procedures when you're starting off in place so that you can be accredited. Okay, then this is in any organization is your human resources. Remember, you've got a strategy, which is maybe a 5 or 10-year strategy. I said you must have your resourcing plan. If you're saying I'm going to have 2,000 units in the next 10 years, how many staff members will I need to get there? Do you understand what I'm saying? So year by year, as your units come on board, you need to show how many staff members are you going to need at the end of that plan. You see what I'm saying? Year one, maybe you've got no projects, you're just starting off, you got 3 staff members. It's your whoever, whatever positions. In year 2, you're starting to build units. You're going to maybe add another staff member. Year 3, you are allocating the units. I'm going to need a housing supervisor, a leasing administrator. You're going to put, do you see what I'm meaning by a resource plan? And so forth until I've done my 2,000 units. I will then have 20 staff members in year 10. That's your resource plan. Then you got to have all your human resource policies and procedures that looks at training, recruitment, development, performance management, and so forth. So this you must have in place. When you're starting, you're just doing these, your policies and procedures. It's your first time. When you're in an existing institution, you then have to start giving much more to the SHRA because you're in business. You see? Okay, let me see where am I now. That is the end, guys. Tomorrow, what I'll do is I'm going to deal with the accreditation process for social housing institutions. But if we can just recap for accreditation of, if I can just summarize for you, and please, please, when you get the manual, please read it. If I can summarize for you, we are saying to qualify to be accredited, you must be a legal registered entity, and we're saying preferably Section 21. You must have governance structures in place, a board with the required skills, a board charter, your risk management policies and so forth in place, right? The board code of conduct committees and so forth. You must have property management policies, procedures that you've developed, property development policies, procedures, tenant management policies and procedures, and human resource management. And you've got to have your business strategy and a financial plan, right? Those are the things that you're going to be putting in place to get accredited. When you're an established institution and you're going for re-accreditation, after 5 years or 2 years, whichever one you get, you are going to be required to submit audited financial statements, for example, to the SHRA. Your internal audit and all those other things that only come on board when you are operating and in existence, you will then submit. If you don't, an existing organization can get accreditation and they don't comply with these other things that they need to qualify, audited financials and so forth, they can lose their accreditation. You understand? So it's important that you understand that and read your manual. We're going to close because it's 12 o'clock and we'll start tomorrow. I know that maybe John will want to say something, but Dudu had specifically asked us, John, just to get maybe 3 or 4 people. How many do we have in this group? Just feedback on how it went. Maybe 4 people just to tell us your just overall evaluation, because it's the first time that we're actually doing virtual training, whether it was useful, what can we improve on maybe for day 2. John?
So let's allow that to happen now. And then I'll just then give the closing remarks before tomorrow's session. Colleagues, if there are 1 or 2 of you that just wants to raise any points that you want us. In fact, when we log off the call, I will request that Cheryl, Dudu, Lesego, and Mandla please remain on the call just for us to just debrief for 15 minutes so that with the feedback that we're going to be receiving now, we can see how we bring that in. So what do they say? The table is open for anyone to come and sit and find yourself a place and give us your feedback on day 1. We're not necessarily closing the session.
Yeah, I see Kate. I see Kate, I see Karabo, and I see Sean, and I see Ondela, the 4 on my screen. So I'm just picking randomly.
Yeah,
Sean, you want to go first?
Yes. I want, normally when we attend training, they normally ask a person what's the expectation. So my expectation for today is to learn more about social housing. But listening to you, Cheryl, I actually realized I need to investigate and move more, becoming a social housing institution or in that direction. So from coming with the inquisitive mind, I think you just taught me about this industry in 2 hours. And I'm sure there's a lot more based on your knowledge. I mean, you spoke about ward councillors. You spoke about, there's so many different things, aspects in life you spoke about. But based on your understanding of this industry, I can gather there's a lot to learn from you and John. And I just want to encourage, maybe when we do have more sessions, I think you picked up on property management and those things. As a new emerging person of color, as it becomes daunting with all these policies and documents. So I'm praying there is some session, or at least if it's back and forth, like guidance or advice that will come as to, yes, your policy document looks good, or no, your policy document is missing this. You need to do this, that. So I think more guidance from the senior guys has got more experience in this field to help. And I can see Kate look young. I can see Corrabo look young, and most of our other pitches to help us younger emerging people from different walks in life to help in this course. So Cheryl, I really enjoyed this session. I think you were very interactive. I think it was good. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's one. So thanks guys, that's from me.
Thanks, Sean. I hope you're not excluding me in the young, because you see this salt and pepper. Anyone else, colleagues? We're just opening 5 minutes.
I've got Kate on my screen.
Oh, okay.
I see Kate there on my screen. I'm looking at Kate, Karabo, Madia. Maybe we'll take those 3 for time. Sean, Kate, and Karabo.
Okay.
Karabo
Yes, Sean,
or Kate?
Sean, you're very right. I am very young, and even with me, I came into the session with just wanting to understand a little bit more information on this social housing. I particularly live in a townhouse complex which is directly adjacent to squatter camp, and the confusion between social housing as well as RDP and that kind of thing got me interested in understanding, what kind of help, what kind of solutions are there for, for these kind of people? What does social housing mean in terms of, of these kind of people? And suddenly a whole new world is opening up, and I'm hearing solutions of questions I didn't even have to begin with. So this session was very informative, and yes, it is shaping and guiding my next big idea. Thanks,
Awesome.
Cheryl. Thanks very much.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to say that I'm actually busy with an application.
Oh, Karabo, your sound is not as best. Maybe there's something that you just need to shift. Start again.
Am I audible?
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Is it better now?
Yes.
All right, okay. Yeah, I was saying that the training was so informative because I'm busy right now with an application. And see that you mentioned so many things. I think I'm going to revisit our application and read through it as thoroughly as possible so that when you make application, it becomes successful. And I underestimated the importance of accreditation. I think we're going to go through much people with application tomorrow. But having heard Cheryl mention it so many times, I mean, I think I can count with more than all the fibers in my body that accreditation is very important. So I think I'm going to take that accreditation process much more. I'm going to study it harder so that I know, because I know that there's a difference between accreditation and the project. And I hear a lot of people now, I hear a lot of people say that they're more focused right now on getting the project started as opposed to getting the accreditation started. So I think that's the one thing that I'm going to focus on. I think this was very, very important. And I hope that this helps other executives and property developers to take this very seriously.
Okay. Okay, that was not the best of lines, but I think we got the gist. I think what I picked up was you saying more on accreditation. Please hone it in more on accreditation. As Cheryl has indicated, that will be the first section that she also drills in more tomorrow morning. But on that note, colleagues, I think thank you again for coming through and doing the session. Tomorrow, I want to, because remember we are all adults now, and these things are not just supposed to be lectures and academic and just sit there, but there must be things that you can take going forward and put them into practice or get them into actions. So tomorrow I will be giving you, particularly Sean, when you speak about that hand-holding guidance that you think you will need, and on policies and so forth. So I will be sharing with you who the process owners within the SHRA are that you need to interface with. They have templates, some of the examples of the documents that you need, so that in case you want to engage this accreditation process, you have a sight of some of these documents and guidelines that are in place that you can use. So those I'll share with you tomorrow as we conclude tomorrow's session. Government is also, through the SHRA, has put in place a number of support grants. This is apart from the capital grant which you apply for to develop the stock. This is aside from that. There are about other 5 additional support grants that we administer as the SHRA. So tomorrow I'll take also some time just explaining the technicalities around that in terms of who qualifies, what is the amount that the grant is for, and the purposes of that of each of those grants. So that would be my delivery tomorrow. Perhaps also trying to say, come back for that piece tomorrow. Don't abscond. But on that note, thank you so much. We are going to be closing the session.
Guys.
Hope to see you all again tomorrow, and prepare any questions that you may have from today. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Highly appreciate
Bye.
it. Bye.
Okay, bye.
So Cheryl, just stay online.
Thank you, Johnny. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Can I leave, John?
If you are pressed for time for something, yes, but I think let's just do a debrief.
Okay.
Just for 5-10 minutes, if you don't mind, Lisa.
All right.
Yeah. Dudu, are you here? I know that Dudu had to.
I admitted her.
Thought she came back. Yeah,
Oh.
she just came back.
Oh, okay. All right. Who is Mandla here?
Mandla, are you still in the meeting? Okay, he says for some reason it's kicking him out.
Oh. I see we still have Tabo, Tabile, and Tabi. Is there a way that you can unlock those, let's say, on your side?
Yeah.
Because chances are maybe they not in front of the machines. Yeah. It's only Tab.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I think it went fairly well, except the 10 minutes late start, which we could not avert, trying to give people time to log on. Anything else that from your observation you think we need to just factor in tomorrow as improvement?
I think the video, the quality was great, but for some reason, I think the internet has been slow at work. I think that was the reason for the cut. But perhaps tomorrow it will be better quality and then we will play it. But otherwise, I saw it from Mandla machine. It was quite clear. Yeah.
Okay, so should we then go for it, Cheryl?
Is it not because you're doing, I'm saying, is it not because it's linked up to this thing?
No, it's
because
not.
on its own, it's playing fine.
No, I just think it was our connectivity because it started off well. It was just when it got to the middle that it just abruptly stopped.
Okay, I think let's give it a shot again tomorrow. Maybe Cheryl in the first 10 minutes.
In the morning.
Yeah.
Maybe in the morning before we start.
Yes, let's just then do give it 10 minutes just as we start, before you go into the presentation and the slides of tomorrow. So I don't know, Lisa, you're saying you don't need us to test anything in that regard.
Yeah, I think besides the video, everything else is fine. The presentation ran very well. Yeah.
All right. Okay, no, that's
and
fine.
And from
then.
your side, just from your guys' side as observers, because for me, you know, you feel lost when you're used to being in a space with people. It's a bit different and it feels a bit awkward. So what is your thinking? Is there anything that I need to do to change?
No, you've done well. That's relatively how, in fact, because for us, it was not the first time. We've done best practice workshops in the last 2 months.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just looking.
Okay.
I'm looking at that and using it as a juxtapose. So it was perfectly how we would have executed the best practice. Of course, in this case, we are not using the functionalities such as breakaway rooms, which in the best practice were used. I think what we might need to do, I just bumped on, I think in the middle when we were presenting, someone's raised their hand. And I see that people, even during your presentation, are making comments or asking questions on the chat. So maybe either myself and Dudu, while you focus on presentations, either myself and Dudu and Lisejo monitor the what is coming through from participants, either as raised or the chat, so that in case there's something that you need to attend to, I'll let you at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that will be helpful.
Yeah. But overall, I think it was okay. 1 or 2 occasions where you forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
And just that power thing, I think we need to ensure that we are. Overall, it was
Get used to it.
Yeah. Okay, guys. I think that's it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Cheryl, see you just now.
All right, bye.
Yes, guys, bye.
Bye.